And I quote, "I'll be there in a minute. Give me a second."
Time is relative, folks. Time is relative.
Yes. So, hey, cheers to everybody in the chat.
They're a division rival. I don't care how many wins they get. Screw them.
That wasn't the take I was expecting to hear.
I want to gush over watching live Chris Tanev.
I think that we completely underestimate the skill it takes to play defense.
One highlight or several highlights does not a Calder trophy make.
I'm stepping in here. I'm going to be the crotchety old man here. They need to learn patience. They need to understand the tension, everything, and the drama.
How dare! Look at this. How is McDavid not getting a penalty?
You guys need to calm down with this, okay? You guys need to calm down with it.
Oh, good grief. If you were on social media for the morning here across Western Canada, it is not calm in Flames land. It's even not calmer in Canucks land, but about the lack of action on both markets for the Flames and the Canucks. But we'll focus on the Flames here. Welcome to the Shifts and Pucks podcast. You can follow us on X at Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you get your audio, as we are live about an hour and so, a little bit after the trade deadline has hit. It was a very interesting trade deadline for a lot of teams, and we'll get into that. But we'll start with the Flames, and we are joined today by Matt Dubourg from Fireside Chat. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. My second favorite team made a really great trade getting Brad Marchand today, so I'm looking forward to the rat line of Bennett, Tkachuk, and Marchand heading into the playoffs.
So last week, for those that watch wrestling, John Cena turns heel. He turns his back on the fans after 20 years being a face. Brad Marchand, after all these years being a Boston Bruin, and by the way, almost knocking out the Florida Panthers in the first round of the playoffs a couple of years ago, is now a Florida Panther.
Yeah.
This is the year of the heel.
Yeah, and it was an excellent trade by the Panthers. I have to, perfect fit for both their need and the player that they got.
Well, you know what's actually, I think, before we get into the Flames, I think what is absolutely fascinating about what happened there is it really felt like Vegas was going to get Marchand. And
yes.
Like, I think Florida kind of swooped in the last minute and did the Vegas. So that Florida-Tampa series, whenever Florida and Tampa play, good grief, that's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah. I know. It seems like both in the West and the East, the conference finals will be starting in the first round with Dallas likely facing Colorado, and Tampa likely facing Florida. And
well,
whoever wins those series, I think, will probably end up going all the way to the finals.
Yeah, the only counter argument that I would have to that is if you get too beat up because of those intense series. So
yeah.
But that will be interesting. But let's focus on the Flames trade deadline. Coming into this trade deadline, they come off the toughest road trip of the year, longest road trip of the year. Some have called it the gauntlet, and they kind of survived. I think I'm going to say they kind of survived the gauntlet.
Yeah. Like, to me, like, the 5 good teams, they went 1-4. So, like, yes, they got some loser points in 2 of those games, but realistically, like, they didn't really do all that great. All things.
Well, what I was going to say is they played a pretty solid game against Washington. They played a pretty solid game against Tampa. They did not play a solid game against Florida. They were okay against Carolina. They got some poor goaltending against Philadelphia. I think I was a little bit like, I think their best effort was the Dallas Star game. But what I will also say, I think it was also the most disappointing because you did have a 2-0 lead, and you came away with the point, but it would have been nice. I would have been happier with the 3-1 whatever it would have been.
Yeah, 3-2-1. Yeah.
3-2-1. I would have been more preferable than the 2-2-2, but they got 6 points. There is the loser point. Whatever we think about that, that's the rules that they have, and they are in a playoff spot.
Yes.
And the Flames, we're gonna, and I know you and I are gonna disagree on this. So, and I think I'm looking forward to this because I think we're not having this discussion in Flamesland. It's either one way or the other. So but kind of the Flames ended up doing nothing at the trade deadline. No trades. Craig Conroy did what in his interview said he was trying to do some retention spot deals for third-party retention, and the only options really that were available to him were 2-year retentions. So, and I know that this was something that I was hoping the Flames would do, is you would either make wasn't on the buy-sell train. I was on the hockey trade part if you can. If you cannot, let's see if we can do some third-party retention, and it wasn't there.
Yeah, like the only kind of trade that was like that was the Shea Weber from Utah to Chicago trade, just so it can help the Blackhawks reach the cap floor next year.
Yeah.
And even then, that's a different set of circumstances entirely than where the Flames are at.
Right, exactly. So most of social media is kind of on the Flames side anyway, is a little upset they didn't do anything. I'll hear from you first. Let's hear where you're at.
Yeah, well, to me, like paying some of the price tags that you saw with various players, like say the Dylan Cousins trade, would have been foolish from the Flames' point of view. Like, there's no need right now to flesh out this team with NHLers that are kind of struggling at the NHL level, like Cousins is, when you can still use those assets and either trade for somebody else at the draft or utilize those draft picks. With the Flames' track record of actually making some pretty astute selections over the last number of years, having more shots in the gun makes a lot more sense than, hoping for a bounce back from a guy that's playing in a bad team.
Yeah, that Ottawa Buffalo trade, I don't know where I'm at with that, because it feels like Buffalo picks up a player that is often injured in Josh Norris. Jacob Bernard-Docker, that's an interesting pickup for Buffalo, because he was a top 5 pick, not a top 10 pick, a top 5 pick. And the Senators bring back Dennis Gilbert, former Flame, one of 3 former Flames that were traded on this trade deadline, by the way. I'm not sure what to make of that trade. I don't know if Ottawa improved, and I don't know if Buffalo improved. I feel like this is project for project. And
shuffling the deck chairs more or less.
Yeah. And I heard you last week on Fireside Chat, and you were talking about you didn't see that Dylan Cousins is a fit with Calgary, and I agree with you. There wasn't really a trade fit with Dylan Cousins in Calgary.
No, and like realistically, like Calgary would have had to have traded like Connor Zary plus, something, one of like our premium prospects or draft picks just to get Cousins. And like the difference between Zary and Cousins in my mind is not that much to where it would make sense to pull that kind of trade. And like Ottawa getting rid of Norris in that deal, like at least, like he's injured a lot. And so like removing that question mark of, is this player going to play in our lineup at all? Like you are getting a surefire NHL center out of it. So it makes a little bit more sense from their point of view.
Yeah. And Ottawa wanted to get a little bit tougher and meaner and all of that sort of stuff. And they feel like Dylan Cousins can give them that. And Dennis Gilbert adds some depth. And I don't think that you're trading Connor Zary at this point. I mean, I think that the guy is a possible future captain with the team. And so I don't see that happening. So, I mean, and then I guess kind of the expectation was, of course, you had the unrestricted free agents of Joel Hanley, Dan Vladar, and then there's sort of the expectation of trading the Jake Beans, Daniel Miramanov, pardon me. And then, of course, you got the big fish, the Kadris, the Andersons, and the Colemans. And Craig Conroy, I think, has been very clear on what's happening with all of those guys. They weren't going to trade Rasmus Anderson until they could start negotiating with him on July 1st. So that's an off-season or next season conversation. Nazem Kadri is on a no-move situation. So, and you... and Matt, this is the reality of the situation. Is I'm here in Richmond and close to Vancouver. There was a party. The Vancouver Canucks invited the Calgary Flames, Utah Hockey Club, St. Louis Blues, and even for a little time the Anaheim Ducks. They invited them to the party. They went to sleep and thinking that all of these guys would leave the party, and instead the Flames took over the bedroom. The St. Louis Blues are in the kitchen. The Anaheim Ducks are sitting in the living room, and the Utah Hockey Club is hanging out at the patio. The Flames, I think everybody agrees that the Flames are not a good enough team to be in the playoffs, but the reality is that they are in the playoffs, and I don't think that you can sue a sell-off with this team, especially when you've got to negotiate a contract, whether you agree that you should keep Rasmus Anderson or not. You don't want to make this easier. You don't want to make this an easier decision for him.
Well, and the thing that I feel Calgary kind of struggled on the day, and I would give them probably a D on the day, or less. It would have only been an F if they had spent some of the prices to add. It's one of those where, realistically, say with the Farabee Frost trade, you've more or less replaced what Kadri and Coleman bring to this team is in terms of a second line caliber center and middle six winger that are in your age group. And heading into next season, the Flames now have, the only spot that's going to be opened up through expiring contracts is Kevin Rooney's spot. So you're going to have to.
No, they still got Vladar, and they got Heat.
I know. Right? I'm just talking the forwards specifically. Where, in order to open up spots to, say, sign a free agent, or open up a spot for Honzig or Stromgren, who are both knocking on the door, you have to move some bodies out. And this is where I feel that it was a lost opportunity because of the fact that you kind of managed to replace those two guys already internally with the Frost trade. That why not go that extra step and cash out those assets, and you can revisit or even pull a trade similar to the JT Miller trade where you get assets in and then immediately flip it for something else. And it's one of those where it's lack of moves like this where if you were to ask me why Calgary is perpetually in the middle of the NHL, this is it. The Flames are dead last in the NHL heading into the Dallas game for goals in the NHL. They were literally tied going into that game with the Anaheim Ducks with 162 goals in 61 games. That's not a good showing at all. And it's not we need these guys to dig in. Everybody is giving 100%. This is what we've got. We've got the worst offense in the NHL. And granted, the Western Conference has 7 good teams in it. And then, as you alluded to with the Canucks, Flames, Ducks, Utah, and the Blues all being, basically who's the least bad of that group. Calgary, I feel, could have pushed their rebuild and retool efforts ahead had they moved ahead with cashing out Kadri and Coleman's assets and perhaps utilizing them in a different way. And especially with the high price tags that were, we saw Brock Nelson, what he got. like Kadri, you probably get the same return. And it's just frustrating to see some of those returns when, like realistically, I don't think Calgary makes the playoffs anyway.
Well, this is why I disagree with you, is because I don't think the most of those trades were draft picks. The Flames have draft picks, right? The Flames have a ton of draft picks for the next 3 years. So what do you need another draft pick for? If anything, if there was, and you probably, honestly, the Nazem Kadri trade to Colorado happens if the Flames are 6 points out of the playoffs. That happens, and it's likely that Callum Ritchie return that the Islanders got for Brock Nelson probably happens for the Flames, but they're in the dilemma is they're actually in a playoff spot. And I understand a lot of people are talking about, well, they're going to get caked by Winnipeg. I think that there's, and you're right, I actually agree with you, Matt. They're not, I don't see them making the playoffs, but I see the value in trying for this team to get the experience to learn how to get into the playoffs. I still think that there's a value in that. I know that everybody wants these top 10 picks, and I think that this has been a whole discussion around the top 10 pick. This draft is basically, it's not a good draft. And I know that
realistically, the guy that you pick at, say, 10 and the guy that's at like 18 to 20 is not going to be a huge step down from one another this year.
No. And you know what? Nobody's talking about this, but Ryan Pike brought this up, and I need to bring this up again. The 2026 pick with Montreal is only the first selection protected. Yeah. So if the Flames do not give up this 2025 pick, it is basically unprotected next year in 2026.
Yeah.
So you might as well get rid of this pick now and get this out of the way. I guess I look at this as that there's value in experience, even if you don't make it in. Even if Dustin Wolf can learn something from it, even if he doesn't get in.
I get that. Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like, the silver lining to this is that, like, all of those guys are under contract after this season, and you can still trade them at the draft, much like Jacob Markstrom, and, like, the trade rumors to New Jersey at the deadline, and then it getting done on draft day instead. And, would I be shocked if the Flames made those moves on the day before the draft? No. And it's just one of those things where, looking ahead, it's hard to envision, like, a shoe does have to drop with the forward ranks, even if you're wanting to keep most of the veteran guys intact, just because, Stromgren is not very far off of being an NHL player. He's been excellent the last couple of months. Honzig looked fantastic in the preseason, played well when he was here, and has actually been really good on the Wranglers as well. So,
is he injured?
I think so. He either was recently or is now. Not that I'm not really 100% sure at this second, but the thing is that, like, if the Flames want to use the $17 million that they have in cap space on free agency, like, you need to actually have some spots to actually put those people, because, like, it's hard to convince, insert random free agent guy here that, well, hey, welcome to the Flames third line. Like, it's just hard at this point because of the fact there's no room.
My counter to that, like, I see what you're saying, but my counter to that too is getting this Wrangler team through a good playoff run, I think, can help the Flames going forward, because they're going to learn about that they're going to learn what it takes to go through the playoffs as well. So we can see a better William Stromgren, we can see a better Samuel Honzig.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I mean, if it just felt like there was a lot of draft picks that were being tossed around, and I don't, like, again, if there were players, if Logan Steenhoven was available for the Flames to make that trade, I think that that's something I would have considered for the Flames. But I just don't think they need draft picks. Those are 18, 19-year-olds. They need
No, and
20-year-old right now.
Like realistically, like what I was kind of envisioning, like say like the Flames got a first round pick for Kadri just flat. He probably would have returned a prospect or two, but just say it was just a first round pick. Like I would envision like using that capital to then, go into buyer mode at the trade deadline as well. And then, like have your pick of, insert player that was traded today instead, that kind of thing. Yeah. Maybe like more or less like shifting like the asset from being a 34-year-old center to, somebody that fits your timeline a little better at the same time.
Yeah. I think that I don't think that they were in a rock and a hard place. Wouldn't say that, but I think Conroy has been focused pretty much on this is kind of the plan. They weren't going to be they said, they weren't going to be in the rental market. They weren't going to be in the seller market. And to move to the defensive part of this, well, I want to stay here in the forward part for a second. They're getting, and one of the things that Conroy did say today was they're just getting Frost and Farabee kind of acclimatized to the Flames. And Farabee scored a hell of a goal against Dallas. I agree.
That was
a hell of a goal. I think Morgan Frost is eventually going to take Michael Backlund minutes. Like that's how
I agree.
That's what I see there. It would have been nice to find a fourth line. I think everybody's been wanting a fourth line center better than Kevin Rooney. The reality is
well, realistically, moving forward, the replacement for Kevin Rooney on the fourth line is Michael Backlund, and like next season, like realistically, the Flames need to get a 1 or 2C, and have Frost as your third line center and Backlund as your fourth line. Especially if you're keeping Kadri heading into next year. And it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for the team, but I think, like, especially in free agency, like throwing everything at a center that's of some quality is priority number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, they still, I would argue they still need 2 centers.
I agree.
And they would like to get one right shot. So I don't think you're not going to sell
and
that.
I think realistically in the draft, like frankly, with the Flames having several picks in the top 3 rounds, I would be shocked if less than half of them were right shot centers. Like, if there's anybody in that range that makes sense, I think that's how it's gonna end up
I
going.
would be surprised if they try to trade for one use some of that draft capital to get a current.
I agree.
Yeah. I wouldn't I'm thinking a guy like Kirby Doc might be an interest. I mean, often injured, but that might be a guy that they look at as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Defense, and I also think like they still need to, like you mentioned it. It's hard not to argue the offensive side. They still need some offensive talent to find overall. That is in terms of forwards as well. So that's still a work in progress. Let me toss I think some people have suggested this is not going to happen. This has been kind of a tough year for Igor Sharangovich. I think he's been hurt for a lot longer than I think he's cared to admit. I think the end of the season press conference is going to tell us that. And especially last night, I mean, he really struggled in his own end. Is that a possible trade chip?
No. Just the term left on it with 4 years of $5 million. Like, you're going to have to eat at least one more year to see. And, honestly, Sharangovich in the preseason was Sharangovich of last year. And then he got hurt right off the bat. And every player that I've ever seen get hurt that misses like a month of the season always has a terrible year and then bounces back to being the same player they were the following year. Because more or less, like, all the players train hard to get into NHL shape for the start of the season. And then because you're injured, you basically lose all of that conditioning and waffle. Like, I remember there was one season that Michael Backlund strained like an ab muscle and missed like the first month, and he was absolutely terrible that season. And yet, like the 10 plus years since, like he's been the Mr. Consistent. So I'm not concerned about Sharon Govich. I think he'll have a good bounce back year next year. It's just unfortunate timing and luck for the type of injury that he got and the duration of it.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Defensively, I think there was an expectation, I think, for a lot of people to see Joel Hanley a UFA move. Didn't happen. I think there's two ways to look at this. Joel Hanley, I think that if it's the right price, the Flames will probably consider it, re-signing him. But the thing is, like, I'm not saying that Joel Hanley is not. I want to be clear. I don't think Joel Hanley is a top 4 defenseman. But unfortunately, this year the problem is he's been the best defense partner for Mackenzie Weegar this year.
Yeah. No, and like realistically, if the Flames were to have dealt him today, like they would have got maybe a 7th round draft pick, which does not move the needle. It would be like trading Vladar for a 4th or a 5th. It's like, or we could just keep our backup goaltender. Like, and like that is definitely a position that this team needs to address heading into the off season. Getting a full-time equal-ish talent player to play with Weegar. I know that Zane Parekh is likely going to be in the NHL next year based off of him utterly demolishing the OHL again. So you might see him getting promoted to play with Weegar. We'll see. But they definitely do need to do something with that spot.
Yeah, I know that everybody. I'm not saying don't get excited about Zane Parekh, but I will also say I wish there was an AHL option for him. I think that has to be fixed because he probably. It would not hurt him to play a little bit of time at AHL just to get acclimatized and then bring him back to the NHL if you have that option.
Yeah, well, like he's literally the first defenseman in the OHL since Bobby Orr to score back-to-back 30-goal seasons as a defenseman. So, that's absolutely fantastic, and he probably goes 2nd or 3rd overall if they do a redraft from last year. So, the Flames definitely hit a home run on that pick. It's just hoping that he can get a little bit of experience with something more, as you said, either a deep run to the Memorial Cup or, maybe some AHL playoff time.
Yeah, for sure. So that's and then Vladar was the other option here. And I think just, again, it's kind of like Hanley. You're not.
If Devin Cooley was playing well, then I think that they might have just to see what Cooley would bring. But he has been a disaster since he returned from injury. The Wranglers, I do believe, have only won one of their last 11 games due to both Ignatiev and him playing terribly. So, it's kind of tough for to move Vladar unless you're getting a goalie in return. And, how many situations are there where that even makes sense? Like, the only one I could think of would be to, like, have a trade where Chet Pickard comes back, sending Vladar to Edmonton, and who wants to help them out?
Yeah. Well, the Wranglers sit 3rd in the Pacific Division, and so with 66 points. I think the one thing I do admit I was kind of surprised that last year they did find some help for the Wranglers. This year they did not.
Yeah,
that's a bit of a disappointment for me that they didn't do that.
Because frankly, like the Wranglers probably could have used another depth forward or two. Sort of like trading Pedersen for Damiani, I do believe it was. That kind of thing. But that didn't materialize, and and honestly, with how the Wranglers have been playing of late, like they're in danger of missing the playoffs altogether as well. Like especially if this streak of poor play continues for very much longer.
Yeah. Now the retention spot, which I think, like I do agree with Conroy that you couldn't do a 2-year one. Like I don't.
It doesn't make any sense. No.
Yeah. So I think and you have one because you're still retaining on Markstrom. I think the other thing that I wonder that they're thinking a little bit about is if you end up trading Kadri or Coleman, there might be a salary retention that might have to happen in one of those trades that they that might
well, and even conceivably, like it might potentially be possible to trade Huberdeau if you eat some of that too, like especially with his good season.
Yep.
Because like say Huberdeau at $8 million is not out of line for like a whole bunch of teams. So we'll see, and it's just. I do believe it's a good idea to have those retention spots open for the time being until you can either move on from assets like Kadri or Huberdeau, or leave yourself the same flexibility at the trade deadline next year.
Yep. Yeah. So that's basically it with the I think with the Flames. I think a lot of this is we'll go through this playoff battle for the last 20 games. They could end up in the playoffs. They could end up missing the playoffs, but there's also a possibility they end up in the top 10 as well. They're
only actually 4 points up on 10th. So it's and like with 12 of their games remaining being against teams that are either elite or right in the same pack that they are. Fighting for their playoff lives, like that's a good chunk of the remaining schedule, and it won't be easy for the Flames to maintain a pace that they have to this point. So like to me, like honestly, it's flip a coin. They could end up in the playoffs or they could be a top 10 team and could go either way.
Yeah. There's a lot to wait for with the Flames for sure.
And one minor thing that I wanted to add is that the Flames having New Jersey's pick with Jack Hughes being out, like if the Flames do end up losing their first round pick, they might end up having one that's right in the same zone anyway because of that. So
yeah, exactly. And New Jersey really didn't do anything.
No, they fleshed out some depth, but that's about it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go around the league here and kind of go through a few interesting things. Actually, let's kind of stay here a little bit on the Flames side, just because there were 3 former Flames that did move. Dennis Gilbert, we talked about, moved from Buffalo to Ottawa. Andrei Kuzmenko, who was just traded to the Flyers as part of that Frost Farabee Pelche trade, was traded to the Kings. Kings do need some scoring. It's just not Andrei Kuzmenko, but that's okay.
Well, to be fair to Kuzi, he has been better since the start of the calendar year. And a viable second, third line scorer for a team needing somebody who might potentially put the puck in the net. Would not be my first choice, but for the price that LA paid, that was worth it for them.
Yeah. And then the other one was Oliver Shillington, who got moved not once, but twice. He gets moved to the Islanders as part of the Brock Nelson deal. And then he gets moved to Anaheim for Dan's favorite player, future considerations. I think Oliver Shillington ended up getting some bad advice from somebody or decided some things that probably at the end he regrets.
Well, and realistically, like if he had been here since the start of the year instead of in Colorado, he probably has played 60 games this year.
Yeah, he would have been a really good partner for Weir.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, he would have at least got the same shot that Barry and Hanley and Bean have had. And, to Bean's credit, he has come out as a fairly good third pairing defenseman. But, there was an opportunity for Shillington to potentially be a top 4 defenseman on this team. And Instead, he's now in his fourth organization in the calendar year, and yeah, not the best decision that he made, but the Klingberg also left $60 million on the table, so sometimes things go drastically wrong for you as well.
Yeah. So let's start with the playoff grouping here. So it's actually interesting. St. Louis didn't add anything. Vancouver doesn't make a move, and Utah makes the salary dump, or the give Chicago legendary Arizona Coyote Shea Weber to Chicago. So really, nobody does anything in that battle for that final playoff spot, anyway.
Yeah,
So,
like realistically, Vancouver basically sold off Susie for a third-round pick a couple of days ago.
Yep.
And that was the only trade that anybody made from that group that actually impacted the NHL team.
Yeah. We saw the Vegas tweet. They said hi, and then they did nothing, which is very un-Vegas.
Well, realistically, they've already traded their first-round picks from last year and this year and next year, so they don't really have a ton of chips to play with right at the moment. So, sucks to be them. Oh wait, like they already have most of their key guys locked up forever anyway.
Yeah, and they're getting Shea Theodore back here before the playoffs, so that's will be that trade deadline ad. They've had a full season with Tomas Hertl. They're going to be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I would put in the top two of the losers of this trade deadline week is the Edmonton Oilers, and then maybe I have some bias against the Oilers, but I don't understand what you acquired a player that is injured that you got for that you're not going to play for 2 weeks in Trent Frederick. You aren't able to get a trade of Evander Kane, which I think is a massive error. Matt, they gave Victor Arvidsson a no movement clause.
Yeah.
And then
I know the whole offseason and through the trade deadline has been just one bungled thing after another. Like spending the money on Arvidsson and Skinner that should have gone to Broberg and Holloway. Then you only get a second and a third round pick for those two good young players who go on to be fairly decent pieces for St. Louis. Then you have to spend a first round pick, the second and third that you just got, plus more things to get Wallman and Frederick, who are not as good as Holloway or Broberg. Like it's like, what the hell are you thinking? Like, it's just mystifying. Like you could have just not shot yourself in the foot and just paid those two players, and like they wanted to be Oilers, and like it would have been better. Like, hey, we actually have some homegrown talent on our team, and instead, insert 33-year-old plus guys, and then having to backfill and basically get lesser versions of the guys they gave up. Like it just does not make any sense to me.
No, their off season to now has not made any sense at all.
And then like on top of it, like not figuring out how to get a goaltender.
Yeah,
like how many goals were traded at the deadline, and none of them went to Edmonton.
Yeah,
like no offense to Skinner or Pickard, neither one of them is a starting goalie in the NHL, and like when Vladar, who's an average backup, would have been a significant improvement to their goaltending. Like they could have got anybody, and I think it would have been a boost for them. And like heading into the playoffs, like especially if they lose, which if they face a team like Colorado or Dallas, they're going to lose. Like that's almost a fireable offense for their general manager. Just the overall incompetent moves from the start of last offseason until now.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is it wasn't Bowman that made those moves. It was Jeff Jackson, right? So
Yeah.
who took over for Ken Holland briefly there. Like, can we? Everybody's talking about how incompetent the Flames offense is. Ryan Nugent Hopkins has 38 points. That is less. Connor McDavid has 79. That's even less than half. So that's not even like if there wasn't a Draisaitl and a McDavid on this Oilers team,
They'd be with
Oilers
San
team-
Jose.
Yeah,
Like they'd be down. They'd be in that conversation with Chicago and San Jose. Like they're not a good team.
and I don't know. I'm partly I do believe the Oilers can beat the Kings in the first round, but
I'm beginning to question that even.
yeah.
You know, just the overall depth of the Kings. You know, and Kemper is a better goal. Riddick is a better goalie than what the other two guys have been this season, and you know, like LA's depth is better than Edmonton's, and like unless McDavid and Draisaitl steal the show, which they can, like,
seen him do
and
it.
they can beat the Kings, but like if they run into any of the good teams, whether it's Winnipeg, Dallas, or Colorado, or even Vegas, like I do not see a realistic way that the Oilers win that series. Like it's just you know, especially with Dallas getting Mikko Rantanen, like one step away from saying you can lock the West up. Dallas is going to the finals, you know, and it'll be either Dallas or Colorado at this point, just based on like the makeups of each of the teams. And like, I just do not see how, you know, unless, you know, you get all of the horseshoes, that, you know, a team like Edmonton gets past any of those good teams. And, you know, like it'd be basically like saying to me, like, oh, the Calgary Flames are going to come out of the Western Conference this year. It's like, no.
Nobody's saying, yeah. Let's get to the Central, because I think that this becomes interesting. I think that there's a lot of people that are going to be favoring Dallas. The one thing that concerns me is that right side of that blue line has Cody Ceci, who is okay, Matt Dumba, who is okay, but they never got to address that right side of the blue line. Thomas Hartley, I mean, Thomas Hartley was great in the Four Nations. We know what Miro Heiskanen can do if he's healthy. So the left side is good. The right side concerns me. That forward group, though, I mean, with Mikko Rantanen, it does add in a dimension. I mean, they are going to be, there's no question that the Dallas Stars are going to be very, very tough. It's that Colorado-Dallas series is going to be a battle.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see, like, you know, if I'm Colorado, I'm going to try to, like, hold back a bit and, you know, get one of the wild card spots so you face Vegas in the first round and go through our division instead, because that's a lot easier of a road than going through Dallas and then Winnipeg and then, you know, Vegas probably at the end.
Yeah. Colorado did all season has made, I mean, they reshifted their goaltending from Georgiev, and I mean, they brought in Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood. They brought in, they revamped their forward group by trading Mikko Rantanen for Martin Necas and Jack Drury, and then they traded Casey Middlestat for Charlie Coyle, and then they bring in Brock Nelson. They basically did an offseason of moves during the season, which is
rebuild the team on the fly.
Basically, that was literally they got on the fly. They did that, so it's interesting to see if the chemistry on that team is going to work or not. But I mean, I think,
like either they hit a home run grand slam, or you know, things will go off the rails a bit heading into the playoffs, because it usually does take guys a little bit of time to figure out new teams. Although Natchez really didn't take very long at all.
No,
about one shift.
There was a lot of people talking about how overrated Martin Necas was, and I'm like, nope, that guy's not overrated at all. He is a damn good player and a damn good fit in Colorado and a number of different guys. So
Yeah. Like, who knew trading Rantanen for some younger player would actually net you a better result?
yeah, that was quite a gamble by by both Tulsky and McFarland, and it's kind of working out for Colorado. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Carolina. I want to touch on Winnipeg though before we get to the East, because I am not sold on this team. To be honest
No.
with you, I think that
No,
they're not.
they've never actually figured out how to actually win in the playoffs. And
Yeah,
like, they were consistently an elite team, but they don't have like those players that just know how to win in the playoffs. And like, speaking of Brad Marchand from earlier, like, that should have been more the type of player that they went for, somebody who's actually been there and done it properly, and has that edge to his game, where, guys that are more passenger types like Monahan and Toffoli, and even Paul Stastny, when they got him, like, none of those guys have like dragged their team anywhere. And like, as good as like got acquisitions like Tanev were, that's not going to really move the needle for you very much.
yeah, and I think that that's part of the problem. I think their power play has carried them a lot. We cheat. We see different rules in the playoffs. And I'm not. If Calgary gets in, I don't think they'd beat Winnipeg. If Utah gets in, I don't think they beat Winnipeg. But I do think St. Louis and Vancouver have more than a puncher's chance of beating Winnipeg in the first round. Especially
Honestly,
if is healthy and
yeah.
Thatcher Demko's healthy.
Honestly, with the Flames, how they've fared with the Jets in the regular season thus far, honestly, I would view that as more of a toss-up than I would Flames versus any of the other playoff teams. And like, I would not expect the Flames to win that series, but it would be a lot closer than, like, if the Flames, say, played Dallas or Colorado in the first round. I think those would be more or less 4 games and have fun. But like, I think the Flames, even Utah, could give Winnipeg a run for their money. I don't think any of the 4 teams actually beat the Jets, but it wouldn't shock me if any of them did.
Yeah, so that's where we're at with the West. We've got, like, we had the arms race of there, and then the arms race in Florida, which, good grief, you've got Yanni Gord and Oliver Borkstrad in Tampa. Then Florida, they get Seth Jones last week. And then they bring in Nico Sturm, a good 4th line center, and then they bring in Brad Marchand. Like, good, that series is just a ball of hate all over the place. And
I'm kind of hoping that Toronto drops down a spot, so that way, like, those 2 teams have a proper run up to facing each other, instead of like that being the first round matchup, because that will be the series in the East.
Yeah,
like, I truly feel that whoever wins that series wins the cup, or goes to the cup from the East. And probably, unless Dallas or Colorado is in the finals from the West, I think that the East wins this year.
Fair, yeah. So, and then you got Tampa, Toronto. They bring in Scott Lawton, which is a good 3rd line piece. Brandon Carlo, there was some word he was sort of in the Calgary conversation. I said that I would listen to about Brandon Carlo, but ultimately, I don't think you're giving up a prospect like Fraser Minton for Brandon Carlo.
No.
If you're the Flames.
And again, the only way that Carlo made sense to me is if you were going to play shuffle the deck chairs, where you trade out Anderson, and then you use part of those pieces to get Carlo, or some variation, or like, say you trade New Jersey or Florida's first round pick, and you do the swap that way. But yeah, like, what the Leafs paid, all the power to them. Like, that they needed to, frankly, and that does make Toronto a better team, and slightly more of a chance that they might actually go somewhere in the playoffs this year. But it's not going to be easy for them. And with Tampa and Florida both stocking up, like, that's each of the series, like, no matter what the matchups are, like, that's going to be the most fun out of the Eastern Conference, and the rest of them don't seem overly interesting by comparison.
Yeah, it's well, you got Washington, who didn't do anything on this trade deadline day, and they sit in second overall, first in the East. So they got that, and then you've got Carolina, who I think is, I mean, we'll see what happens here. I mean, they take that. I don't blame Eric Tulsky for taking the run. I don't know if they're a strong enough team to beat Washington. Probably they can beat New Jersey, but you know who's 4 points behind New Jersey, Matt?
The New York Rangers?
The Columbus Blue Jackets.
Oh. Yeah.
And
well, I wouldn't sleep on the Blue Jackets.
No, I would not either. Yeah, they are able to score.
Yeah. And honestly, it'll be interesting, like, if Columbus is able to pass New Jersey, and especially with Hughes being out, you know, a matchup between Carolina and Columbus would be fun, because you have a freewheeling offense in Columbus versus the staunch defense of Carolina. It would be an interesting matchup to see who could actually come out on top of that.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then you've got in the other wild card spot, Ottawa and the Rangers. Detroit's 1 point behind. Montreal is hanging around. And then you got Boston, who basically sold the farm. They're out of this. And I think from Boston down, I think they're out.
Oh, yeah.
I'm still not convinced on I'm not convinced on Ottawa. I haven't been sold on them all year. I think the Fabian Zetterlund move might be an interesting move for Ottawa, but I still kind of have a feeling that the Rangers are going to find their way in that spot.
Yeah, like, honestly, between Columbus, Ottawa, New York, Detroit, and Montreal, I think that the best two out of that is Ottawa and New York. And like, when all five of those teams were within 2 points of each other, it's going to be a real dogfight heading through to the playoffs. And I would think that Ottawa and the Rangers probably end up finishing ahead of those teams, and you could end up seeing New Jersey fall right out of it because they're only a few points up on Columbus. So it'll be interesting. I think that you might see New Jersey miss the playoffs, and Ottawa, New York, and Columbus just shift up one.
That's possible. Yeah, that's a possibility, and that's a benefit for the Flames, because they could end up getting. You end up with that pick anyway, and then you give that other pick to Montreal, and you're fine, right? So,
yeah.
So there you go. Anything else? Did we declare? You've declared Dallas the winner. I think that's kind of the commonplace. You got the best player in the draft in the available, which was Mikko Rantanen. So and
you didn't really delete anything from your roster. Like, Stankoven's a good piece, but the difference between the two is immense.
Yeah, and then they did sign Wyatt Johnston to a contract extension today too. So that's a big. And that guy's going to be like, that's your franchise core piece going forward that you locked up. So, and then you lock up Rantanen. So Dallas keeps figuring it out.
Dallas basically said, "Hey, we're here to stay for the next half decade, and we're going to be one of the top 3 teams in the West. Have fun."
Yep, that's basically it. Anything else on this trade deadline that we should discuss?
Not really. It's just going to be interesting to see how all the various teams respond with their new people, and how fast Boston just sinks like a rock. And yeah, like, I'm curious to see, like, Calgary, I think, out of the teams that are in the West, has the hardest schedule out of the 4 or 5 teams that are in that conversation. But we'll see. It's going to be very much a jump ball for everybody on both sides of the ledger.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the West, I have leaned St. Louis. I'm not incredibly sold on St. Louis, but Vancouver, for me, I think they just, if Pettersson can figure this out, then they have a chance. But and Quinn Hughes needs to get healthy. I just feel St. Louis is the most consistent, trustworthy team out of the 4 right now, and that's why I have them there. But
yeah, like it would not surprise me if Utah made it. It would not surprise me if St. Louis made it. Same with Calgary or Vancouver. I think all 4 are pretty much on equal footing. For each has their positives, each has their negatives, and I think they're all just right there, right next to each other.
Yeah. Oh, two other teams that I thought did not do very well. What are the Philadelphia Flyers thinking? Like that is turned out like you traded Kuzmenko for a 20. Like your flip for Frost and Farabee was a 2027 third-round pick and Jacob Pelche. And I think Pelche will do well in Philly, but I don't think that that's enough for Frost.
No, like that trade was highway robbery by the Flames. To get like 2 legit mid-20s, middle 6 forwards for a second-round pick, a guy that the Flames were kind of thinking of putting on waivers, as like we discussed earlier this season.
Yeah,
and Peltier, who passed through waivers earlier this year, like to get that for basically a second-round pick, it's like, well, duh.
Yeah.
But on the Philadelphia side, like unless they're going big game hunting and like wanting to sign Mitch Marner and actually agreeing to terms with him in the offseason, I don't see any reason this makes sense. Much like Buffalo trading Dylan Cousins, frankly. Like that was sometimes, as Conroy said, sometimes not doing something is the better move. And Buffalo is the prime example of, well, we just traded one of our few good players for basically nothing. Like, because like Norris and Docker are good parts, but like they haven't shown things consistently. So,
and Jacob Bernard Docker also was on waivers this year and cleared.
Yeah.
So,
I know some mystifying things from those teams, but
the one other team that I don't know what was going on there. What are the Seattle Kraken doing?
Well, frankly, was more pleased by what they did because like they realized that they don't have a true game breaker.
No, that's true.
And so cashing in as many parts as they can for picks made sense for them. They basically had the trade deadline I wish the Flames had, where trading off a few surplus pieces for assets at least would have but like Seattle, frankly, they need to be bad in order to get good, and they like even at their best, like they're not good enough.
They've won. They beat Vancouver and Calgary the exact same way this year. They played 55 minutes of absolutely god-awful hockey. They played 5 minutes of good hockey and found a way to win a game in overtime. When I watch this team, I just find them so pedestrian. They're not interesting.
No, and it's one of those things that with Schwartz and Eberle being older, like they need to move on from them and reset. Even though like they're very good players in their own right, it's just they need to get some more youth in their lineup. And it sucks that Borgstrand had to go from their point of view, because he was a key contributor for them, but the return that they got, that made a lot of sense.
They got some good picks that they can use, and Detroit's retaining some salary on that Borgstrand deal, so that's good as well. But
no, and frankly, it just makes the draft a little bit more interesting, because like there are teams like Calgary, like Seattle, who now have a dearth of extra picks that if teams are wanting to shake things up, you can actually facilitate a trade. And like each team will have plenty of cap space to make things happen if teams want to go in a different direction. So it'll be interesting to see, like the amount of flexibility that both Seattle and Calgary have are immense heading into the draft after this season.
Yep. It's going to be, whether the Flames make the playoffs or not, the off season, this probably is going to be one of the more intriguing ones with the stuff that they have, the cap going up, and the names that will be out there. It's
like when you have 2 firsts, a second, and a pair of thirds, and a fairly stocked prospect cupboard. Like they just need some top end forward skill.
And that wasn't me. Like there was the report that the Flames were going to go in on a rant, and I actually wouldn't have wanted that because I just think that's too. Even with the cap going up, you've got players to sign.
Yeah, I agree.
$14 million with Mikko Rantanen.
No, frankly, like the Flames need to just be a little bit more patient and actually draft and develop some people.
Yeah.
Because like they have hit the mark on a number of their draft picks and like in the various leagues, like they're performing extremely well. So, and like they have a number of guys that are looking like high quality future NHLers. So just gotta see whether or not you can add via free agency or make prudent trades at the deadline or at the draft as well. So lots to look forward to. Just wanting to not be quite so patient with turning the page on this team though to get to the next stages.
Fair enough. Well, tell us what's going on Fireside Chat this weekend.
We're going to be recapping the week that was after the Montreal game and the trade deadline that did not really materialize into anything, and discussing that and looking ahead to the last 19 games for the Flames and the tough road that is between them and game 1 of the playoffs. So
yes, whether they're in it or not.
Yeah.
We will have a Canucks conversation, Canucks little chat on Sunday. They did nothing as well, so we'll unpack that situation on Sunday. So we'll keep an eye on that. That will be, of course, before they play the Dallas Stars on. They play Minnesota on Friday night and Dallas Stars on Sunday. So they got an interesting week ahead. And then so we'll recap that. Of course, you can. Where do we follow you, Matt? And
at firesidechat.ca on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Play, basically anywhere you can find a podcast at Fireside Podcast.
Yeah. With us, same thing. Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks, Twitch.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe again wherever you get your audio. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now. Thanks for coming, Matt.
Yep. Thank you.